The alarm on the boarding deck screamed twice before it cut off, and I stood there with my hands behind my back while a Kesserine inspection officer walked down the line of new recruits like he was counting cattle. His 4 eyes moved fast, judging, dismissing. He had done this 100 times before, on 100 different ships, and every human he had ever met fit neatly into the same small box in his mind. Weak, new, barely worth the fuel it took to scan us. Then his eyes reached me. He stopped walking. I did not move. I kept my eyes forward, my posture relaxed, the same way I had been taught to stand when everything inside me wanted to do something else. The inspection officer's 4 eyes narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again, like his brain was trying to reject what it was looking at. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the metallic tang of his breathing mask. "Rourke," he said, reading the name stitched into my collar. His translator device buzzed with something that was not quite a word. "Cade Rourke." "Yes, sir," I said. He did not answer right away. His hand, 4 long fingers wrapped in grayscale, hovered near the scanner at his belt but never touched it. For 3 full seconds, the busiest inspection officer on this side of the station simply stood in front of a 26-year-old ensign and said nothing at all. Then he stepped back, turned to his aide, and muttered something in his own language that the translator refused to convert. His aide's 4 eyes went wide too. Without another word, the inspection officer walked off the boarding deck early, skipping the rest of the line, skipping the paperwork, skipping everything that inspection officers never skip. Nobody said anything. The other recruits shuffled and glanced at me sideways, unsure what had just happened, and I gave them nothing to work with. I had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to make a strange moment stranger is to explain it. My orders were to report to Deck 7, Diplomatic Wing, within the hour. I picked up my duffel bag and walked. The Aurelian Concorde was not a warship, not officially. It was built to look like a floating embassy, all soft curves and polished glass, with corridors wide enough for 6 different species to walk shoulder to shoulder without brushing wings, tails, or exoskeletons against each other. It carried scientists, translators, cultural attachés, and diplomats from a dozen worlds who were trying, in their slow and complicated way, to keep the peace between civilizations that did not always want peace. I had been assigned here 2 days after finishing my final evaluation, and I still was not sure why. My file said ensign. My orders said escort duty. Nothing about my paperwork suggested I belonged anywhere near the most sensitive diplomatic vessel humanity had ever put its name on. But orders were orders, so I walked the long curved corridor toward Deck 7, past viewports that showed the slow turn of a gas giant striped in orange and violet, past murals painted by species whose names I still struggled to pronounce, until I reached a set of doors guarded by 2 armored Threll soldiers, who looked me over like I was something that had wandered in off the street. "Ensign Rourke," I said, "reporting for escort assignment." The taller of the 2 soldiers checked a data slate, grunted, and stepped aside. The doors slid open. The room beyond was bright, lined with tall windows, and at the center of it stood a young woman who did not belong to any species I had studied in my briefings, though I recognized the general shape from old files. Pale gold skin, dark violet hair pulled into a tight braid that fell past her waist. Eyes the color of storm clouds, sharp and unblinking, fixed on me the second I walked through the door. Princess Useri Volcatra, heir to the Volcatra Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful ruling houses in this sector of the galaxy. Her people had been navigating the stars since before humans figured out how to build a wheel that did not wobble. She looked at me the way most people look at a stain on a clean floor. "This is my escort," she said, not to me, but to the aide standing beside her, a thin, nervous man in a gray uniform. "Yes, Your Highness. Ensign Cade Rourke, human. I can see that he's human." Her voice was smooth, cool, and carried the kind of authority that came from being told she was important since the day she was born. "I was told humanity would be sending someone experienced, someone capable. I assure you, Your Highness." Ensign Rourke was cleared through the proper channels. "He looks like he just left a classroom." I said nothing. I had heard worse. She circled me slowly, arms folded, studying me the way a buyer studies a piece of furniture they already regret purchasing. "Do you even know how to use that weapon on your belt, Ensign? Or is it decoration?" "I know how to use it, Your Highness. Have you ever needed to?" I hesitated for half a second, just long enough that a sharper observer might have noticed. She did not. "I've trained extensively," I said, which was true, and also nothing at all like an answer. "Training." She said the word like it tasted bad. "Your species has existed among the stars for what, 200 years?" My people had already built and lost 3 empires by the time your ancestors figured out how to leave your own atmosphere, and now the Concord sends me a boy fresh out of a training simulator to guard my life during the most sensitive negotiation my house has attempted in a generation. I'll do my job, Your Highness. See that you do. She turned away from me like I had already stopped being interesting. Stay close, stay quiet, and try not to embarrass yourself in front of people who matter. I followed 2 steps behind her as she swept out of the room, her aides scrambling to keep pace, the Threll guards falling in behind us. I kept my expression neutral, my shoulders relaxed, my eyes doing the quiet, constant work of checking exits, checking hands, checking the small details that mattered more than anyone in that room understood. We walked through the diplomatic wing toward the main atrium, where a delegation from 3 different systems was gathering for the opening reception of talks that had been 15 years in the making. Yseri was here to represent her father, the Dominion's ruling monarch, in negotiations over a disputed trade corridor that 3 species had been quietly circling for a decade. It was delicate work, the kind that could end in either a treaty or a war, and I understood, even then, that the Concord had not sent me here by accident. The atrium was full when we arrived, delegates in flowing robes, in armored suits, in translator collars that hummed and clicked as a dozen different languages folded into something everyone could understand. Yseri moved through the crowd like water moves around stone, greeting old allies, nodding at old rivals, every gesture measured and practiced. I stayed close, the way I was told to. It was near the far wall, close to a viewport that looked out over the slow curve of the station's outer ring, that I noticed him. A Reaver mercenary, hired as private security for one of the smaller delegations, standing near the refreshment table, with the kind of relaxed posture that mercenaries wear when they are not actually relaxed at all, just watching everything without seeming to. His eyes drifted across the room the way mine did, sweeping for exits, for threats, for anything out of place. They landed on me. He went still. It was subtle, the kind of stillness only another professional would catch, but I caught it. His jaw tightened. His hand, which had been resting easy near his weapon, moved away from it instead, like he had suddenly decided that hand did not need to be anywhere near a weapon while I was in the room. He leaned toward the mercenary beside him and murmured something low, and the second mercenary's eyes found me too. Neither of them approached, neither of them said a word to me directly, but within 2 minutes, both of them had drifted toward the far exit and left the reception early, well before their delegation's business was concluded. Well before anyone would consider that a normal thing to do. Yseri did not notice. She was deep in conversation with a delegate from the outer systems, discussing shipping tariffs with the kind of patient precision that made it clear why her father trusted her with negotiations this important. But her aide noticed. He glanced at the departing mercenaries, then at me, his brow furrowed, and said nothing. I filed it away and kept my eyes on the room. The reception ran long, past the point where most humans would have started fading, but I had learned to stand still for hours if the job required it. Yseri worked the room with the tireless energy of someone who had been raised for exactly this, gathering favors, testing alliances, reading the temperature of every conversation before it finished forming. At one point, during a lull between delegates, she turned to me, arms still folded, and studied me again with those storm cloud eyes. "You're very quiet, Ensign." "I was told to stay quiet, Your Highness. Most humans I've met can't manage that for more than a minute." A faint, almost curious frown crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "What did you do, before this assignment?" "Training, mostly." "Mostly?" "Yes, Your Highness." She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, like she was trying to find the crack in an answer that sounded too smooth to be complete. I gave her nothing. Eventually she turned back to the room, dismissing the question the way she dismissed most things about me, filing me under unimportant, and moving on to matters that mattered more. I did not correct her. Across the atrium, near the exit the mercenaries had used, I caught sight of a data terminal blinking with an incoming priority message, the kind reserved for security personnel. I excused myself for a moment, checked it quietly, and read 3 lines that made my stomach tighten in a way it had not tightened in months. A Reaver scout vessel had been detected on the edge of the system, holding position just outside the Concorde's sensor range, watching. I closed the message, smoothed my expression back into its usual careful neutrality, and returned to my post 2 steps behind the princess who thought I was nothing more than a boy fresh out of a simulator. She had no idea what was drifting toward us in the dark. Neither yet did I know how much worse it would get before the night was through. The proximity alarm hit 40 minutes after I read that message, and the sound of it tore through the diplomatic wing like a blade through silk. Every delegate in the atrium froze. Translators stuttered. Somewhere near the refreshment table, a glass hit the floor and shattered, and nobody moved to clean it up because every eye in the room had turned toward the nearest viewport, where 3 unmarked vessels had dropped out of transit space directly in the Concorde's shipping lane. Reaver ships. I recognized the hull design instantly. The jagged plating built for intimidation as much as armor, the weapons ports that glowed a dull red even at rest. Everyone remain calm, the ship's announcement system said, in 6 different languages at once. This is a precautionary lockdown. Please proceed to designated safe areas. Nobody remained calm. I moved before I had finished thinking about moving, closing the distance to Wiseri in 2 steps, my hand finding her elbow before her own guards had processed what was happening. Your Highness, we need to move now. She pulled her arm back, storm cloud eyes flashing with something between anger and fear. Do not touch me, Ensign. There are 3 hostile vessels off our bow, and this room has 4 exits and no cover. We are leaving. Something in my voice must have carried more weight than my rank suggested, because for the first time since I had met her, Yseri Volcatra did not argue. She fell into step beside me as I guided her toward the nearest secure corridor, her Threll guards forming up around us, her aide half running to keep pace. Behind us, the ship's captain, a broad-shouldered man named Halden Voss, came over the internal comm with a voice that stayed remarkably steady for someone whose ship had just been surrounded. This is Captain Voss. The Reaver vessels are hailing us. I am opening a channel to the bridge. All diplomatic personnel, please proceed to your designated shelters. I did not take Yseri to a shelter. Shelters were built to hide people, not protect them, and hiding was the last thing I wanted to do if this went the way I feared it might. Instead, I brought her to a security alcove near the bridge, a small reinforced room with a single door and a direct line to the ship's command deck, the kind of space built for exactly this situation. You are supposed to take me to the shelter, Yseri said, arms folded tightly against her chest even as her voice wavered. The shelter has 40 people in it and 1 exit. This room has better odds. You've clearly never been in a hostage situation before. I did not answer that. On the small display screen built into the alcove wall, I watched the bridge feed. Captain Voss stood at the center of the command deck, flanked by his senior officers, facing a holographic projection of the Reaver captain, a towering figure with mottled gray skin, tusks filed into points, and eyes that carried the flat, patient hunger of something that had never once in its life needed to be afraid. This is Gorak Thal, of the Keros Reavers, the figure said, his voice a deep rumble that the translator struggled to soften. You carry a princess of the Volcatra Dominion aboard your vessel. You will surrender her to us, along with any Volcatra cargo, and my ships will allow you to continue on your way undamaged. Refuse, and we will take what we want regardless. Beside me, Yseri went very still. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, unclenched slowly, like she was forcing herself into the calm she had been trained since childhood to project even when everything inside her was screaming. They cannot be serious, her aide whispered. A direct assault on a Concorde vessel, this close to neutral space. This would violate a dozen treaties. Reavers don't care about treaties, I said quietly. They care about profit and reputation. A Volcatra princess is worth both. Yseri's eyes cut toward me, sharp and searching. How would you know that, Ensign? I did not answer. On the screen, Captain Voss squared his shoulders and addressed the Reaver captain with the same steady voice. This vessel operates under Concorde neutrality protocols. Any hostile action against us will be treated as an act of war against every signatory species aboard. I strongly advise you to reconsider. Gorak Thal's tusk mouth curled into something that might have been a smile on a human face, and was something far more dangerous on his. Neutrality protocols mean nothing to me, Captain. I have taken Concorde vessels before and lost nothing for it. Then perhaps you should check your scanners more carefully before you decide to take this one, Voss said. Something in his tone made me lean forward. He was buying time. I had spent enough hours around command officers during training to recognize the shape of it, the small pause built into his words, the flicker of his eyes toward a secondary console. On the Reaver bridge, visible in the background of the projection, I saw one of Gorak Thal's officers lean toward a display, frown, and go very still. He tapped the shoulder of the officer beside him. That officer looked too, and his tusked face lost whatever color it had. They had found something on their scanners, and it was not the Concorde's weapons array, because the Concorde barely carried any. Gorok Thal noticed the disturbance behind him and turned, snapping something in his own guttural language. His officer answered fast, low, urgent, pointing at the display. The Reaver captain's flat, hungry eyes narrowed, then widened, and for the first time since the hail began, his massive frame went rigid. He turned back to the projection, and his voice, when it came, had lost most of its earlier confidence. "Your crew manifest," he said slowly. "Confirm it." "Excuse me?" Voss said. "Your crew manifest. I want the human security roster. Now." Voss glanced at his first officer, clearly as confused as everyone else in that room, but he gave the order. A moment later, a data packet transferred across the open channel, the standard security clearance list required for any vessel demanding safe passage through contested space. It listed names, ranks, assignments. Somewhere near the bottom, buried among 24 other junior officers, was mine. Cade Rourke, Ensign, Diplomatic Escort Detail. Gorok Thal read it. His tusked jaw worked slowly, like he was chewing on something that did not taste right. He said something to his officer, quiet and clipped, and the officer repeated it back, and then repeated it again, as if confirming it once was not enough. "Recall the boarding teams," Gorok Thal said finally, his voice flat. "Captain," one of his officers said. "I said recall them." The Reaver captain's eyes, for just a moment, flicked toward something on his own display that none of us on the Concord Bridge could see, and something in his expression shifted from predator to something closer to caution. "This vessel is not worth the cost. The Princess is worth an entire fleet's ransom," another officer protested. "I did not ask for your opinion." Gorok Thal's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the room behind him. He turned back to the projection of Captain Voss, and for the first time in the entire exchange, there was something almost respectful in the way he inclined his massive head. "Consider this encounter concluded, Captain. My ships will withdraw." The channel closed before Voss could respond. On the bridge, I watched the entire command crew stare at the now empty projection space in stunned silence. Outside the viewport, moments later, the 3 Reaver vessels folded back into transit space and vanished as quickly as they had arrived, leaving nothing behind but confused sensor readings and a ship full of people trying to understand what had just happened. Beside me, in the security alcove, Yseri Valkatra had not moved. Her storm cloud eyes were fixed on the now blank display screen, her jaw tight, her mind clearly working through the same impossible sequence of events I had just watched unfold. "They had us," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They had every advantage, superior firepower, surprise, a target worth a fortune, and they simply left." "They did," I agreed. "Reavers do not simply leave, Ensign. I have studied them my entire life. They are opportunists without honor and without fear. Something on that crew manifest frightened the single most dangerous pirate captain in this sector badly enough that he called off an attack he had every reason to complete." I said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say. Her eyes turned to me slowly, and this time there was no condescension in them at all, only a sharp, uncomfortable curiosity that I recognized as far more dangerous than her earlier dismissal had ever been. "What was on that list, Ensign Rourke?" "Crew names, Your Highness. Standard clearance information." "Your name was on that list, along with 24 others. Was it your name that made him stop?" I held her gaze, keeping my expression as still and unreadable as I had trained myself to keep it for years, and said the only thing I could say without lying outright. "I don't know what made him stop, Your Highness. I'm just an ensign." She studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, some careful recalculation taking place, the beginning of a question she was not yet ready to ask out loud. "You are a very strange man, Cade Rourke," she said finally. "I've been told that before." The bridge comm crackled back to life, Captain Voss's voice carrying through the ship, informing the crew and passengers that the threat had passed and the lockdown was lifted. Around us, the tension that had gripped the Concorde for the better part of an hour began, slowly, to release. But it did not release from Yseri. She walked beside me back through the corridors toward her quarters, quieter now than she had been since I first met her, her earlier arrogance replaced by something more careful, more watchful. Twice I caught her glancing sideways at me, studying my face like she was trying to read a language she had never encountered before. When we reached her door, she stopped and turned to face me fully, her expression unreadable in a way that mirrored my own. "I looked down on you," she said. "When we met, I assumed you were nothing, sent here as a formality, a junior officer given a task above his experience. That's a fair assumption to make, Your Highness. Is it accurate? I did not answer right away, and in the silence that followed, something passed between us that neither of us said out loud. She was too well trained in the art of reading people to miss the weight of that silence, and I was too well trained in the art of holding secrets to fill it. Get some rest, Your Highness, I said instead. It's been a long night. She held the door open a moment longer, staring at me with those storm cloud eyes, before finally stepping through and letting it close behind her. I stood in the empty corridor for a long moment afterward, alone with the low hum of the ship's systems, and the quiet, uneasy feeling that whatever had just happened on that bridge was only the first thread of something much larger beginning to unravel. Somewhere in the depths of the ship's archives, buried under layers of classification I was not supposed to know existed, a name was attached to records that even a Reaver captain feared enough to abandon a fortune rather than risk finding out what it meant. It would not stay buried much longer. 3 days after the Reaver ships fled, I woke to find my personal terminal flashing with a security notice I had never seen before. Someone had attempted to access my service record. The attempt had failed, blocked by classification protocols above my own clearance, but the notice told me exactly who had tried. Yseri Volcatra. I sat on the edge of my bunk for a long moment, staring at that notice, and felt the quiet, familiar tightening in my chest that came whenever the past threatened to catch up with the careful, ordinary life I had been trying to build on top of it. She had not asked me directly again since that night outside her quarters. Instead, she had gone looking for answers on her own, using the authority of a Dominion princess to pull at threads she did not fully understand. And I knew from experience that people like her, patient and clever and used to getting what they wanted, did not stop pulling once they started. I dressed, reported for duty, and found her waiting for me in the same bright, tall-windowed room where we had first met, standing at the viewport with her arms folded and her back to the door. "Good morning, Your Highness. Your file is sealed," she said, without turning around. "Not redacted, sealed. There is a difference, Ensign, and I know it well. Redacted records still show a shape, a shadow of what was removed. Sealed records show nothing at all. It is as if the person attached to them did not exist before a certain date. I couldn't say, Your Highness. I don't have access to my own classification level." "I do." She turned to face me now, and there was no anger in her expression, only a sharp, focused intensity that reminded me she had not survived Dominion court politics by being anything less than brilliant. "I requested access through official Concord diplomatic channels. Do you know what I was told?" "No, Your Highness." "I was told that the request itself had been logged and forwarded to a review board I have never heard of, operating under an authority that supersedes even my father's diplomatic status." She took a step closer. "In 30 years of political life, I have never once had a request denied by anyone below the level of a ruling monarch. And now a single human ensign's personnel file has done exactly that." I kept my expression neutral, though it cost me more effort than it should have. "Perhaps it's a clerical error. Do not insult me." The words came out sharp, cutting through the careful politeness we had maintained since the Reaver incident, and for a moment, the old coldness from our first meeting flickered back into her eyes. But underneath it now was something new, something that had not been there before. Not contempt, fear, carefully controlled, the fear of someone standing at the edge of a truth too large to see all at once. "I am not asking you to betray classified information," she said, quieter now. "I am asking you to help me understand what I am looking at. 3 nights ago, I watched the most feared pirate in this entire sector abandon a fortune and a war-worthy hostage because your name appeared on a crew manifest. I need to understand why, Cade, not as a princess making demands of a subordinate. As someone trying to make sense of something that terrifies her." That last word landed harder than I expected it to. I had spent the better part of 2 years learning how to live quietly, how to let people assume the least about me, how to answer questions in ways that were true without being complete. It had worked well enough on strangers, on training instructors, on the ordinary rhythm of ordinary duty. It had never worked on someone who refused to stop looking. "Sit down," I said finally. She hesitated, surprised by the shift in my tone, then crossed to one of the chairs near the viewport and sat, watching me with the same sharp, unblinking attention she had shown from the very first moment we met. I did not sit. I stood near the window instead, looking out at the slow turn of the stars, and I told her the parts of the truth I could tell without breaking the classifications I had sworn to keep. 4 years ago, I said, before humanity had a formal seat on the Concord Council, there was an incident on the edge of contested space. A civilian colony, human, about 11,000 people, was caught in the middle of a territorial dispute between two factions that had no interest in whether the people living there survived it. Our government sent a response force. I was part of that force. What happened? Things went wrong, badly wrong, in ways I'm not able to describe to you in detail. By the time it was over, the colony survived, but the cost of making sure it survived was higher than anyone back home expected humanity to be able to pay, or willing to pay. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Word of what happened out there spread. Not through official channels, through the kind of channels that mercenaries and reavers and every other predator species in this sector pay close attention to. The kind of channels that decide, quietly and permanently, which targets are worth the risk and which ones are not. Yseri's storm cloud eyes had not moved from my face the entire time I spoke, and you were part of that response force. I was. That does not explain why a Reaver captain would recognize your name on sight, 4 years later, on a completely different ship, in a completely different sector. I hesitated, and this time the hesitation was real, not performed. There were things I had been told never to say out loud, not to Concord officials, not to family, not to anyone outside the small, quiet circle of people who had been there. But sitting across from her, watching the fear she was trying so hard to control, I found myself wanting, for the first time in a long time, to give someone the truth instead of the careful shape of it. There's a designation, I said slowly, not a rank, something informal, something that spread through those channels I mentioned, attached to a very short list of names from that response force. I don't know exactly how wide it spread, or exactly what stories have grown around it since. I've spent the last 2 years trying very hard not to find out. What is the designation? I'd rather not say it out loud, Your Highness. Cade. It was the first time she had used my given name without the title attached, and something about the way she said it, quiet and direct, and stripped of all the careful formality she usually wore like armor, made it harder to hold the line I had been holding. They call it the Quiet Reckoning, I said finally. Among certain crews, certain captains, it's not an official designation. It's not in any human record I've ever seen. It's something that grew in the spaces between what actually happened and what people who were not there imagined must have happened. And over 4 years, it grew into something much larger and much more frightening than the truth ever was. But it started with truth. It started with a colony that survived when nobody thought it should have. Yseri sat back in her chair, absorbing that, her sharp mind visibly working through the implications. So when Gorak Thal saw your name on that manifest, he was not reacting to Cade Rourke, Ensign. He was reacting to a legend that has grown so large it no longer resembles the person who started it. Something like that. And you have spent the last 2 years trying to disappear inside an ordinary rank, an ordinary posting, an ordinary life, hoping the legend would eventually stop following you. I did not answer, because she had already said it more clearly than I would have managed myself. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out the viewport at the slow turn of the stars, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost the sharp edge it carried at the start of our conversation. I misjudged you, she said. Badly. I looked at a young human officer and assumed the least about him because assuming the least is safe, and safe assumptions have kept people in my position alive for generations. I did not consider that the Concord might send someone to guard me precisely because he was the last person any predator in this sector would risk provoking. I don't think that was the Concord's plan, Your Highness. I think it was a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient. A faint, careful smile crossed her face, the first genuine one I had seen from her since we met. But I will allow you to keep pretending, if it makes this easier for you. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while after that, the kind that neither of us felt any particular need to fill. And for the first time since I had come aboard the Concorde, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a very long time. It did not stay loose for long. 2 hours later, an alert tore through the ship's command systems, the kind of alert that made every officer aboard freeze mid-motion, because it was not a Reaver alert, not a pirate alert, not anything as ordinary and survivable as what we had faced 3 nights before. A fleet had entered the system, moving on a direct intercept course, broadcasting no hail, no demand, no warning of any kind. The ship's sensors identified the fleet within seconds, and Captain Voss's voice, when it came over the internal comm, had lost every trace of the calm he had managed to hold during the Reaver encounter. All hands. General alert. Unidentified fleet inbound. Configuration matches known Ashvane military profiles. I repeat, this is not a drill. Beside me, Yseri went pale in a way I had not seen from her before. Not during the Reaver standoff. Not during any moment I had known her. The Ashvane, she said quietly. Cade, the Ashvane do not negotiate. They do not take hostages for ransom. They do not withdraw when frightened, because nothing frightens them. In 400 years, no species in this sector has ever made an Ashvane warfleet retreat from a target they intended to take. I felt the old, familiar tightening in my chest return, sharper this time, colder, because I understood exactly what kind of storm was now bearing down on us, and I understood, with a certainty that settled into my bones like cold water, that whatever careful, ordinary life I had built over the last 2 years was about to be tested in a way it had never been tested before. Get to the security alcove, I told her, already moving toward the door. Now, Cade, what are you going to do? I did not answer her, because I did not yet know myself, and for the first time in a long time, the not knowing frightened me more than anything the Ashvane fleet might bring with it. The Ashvane fleet dropped out of transit space in perfect formation, 11 vessels arranged in the kind of geometric precision that spoke of a species who had never once needed to improvise, because improvising meant something had gone wrong, and nothing ever went wrong for the Ashvane. I ran the corridors of the Concorde with Yseri half a step behind me. Her earlier composure cracked wide open, her breathing fast and shallow in a way I recognized from every recruit I had ever seen face something bigger than themselves for the first time. You said get to the alcove, she said as we ran. The alcove will not stop an Ashvane boarding party, Cade. Nothing on this ship will stop them. I know. Then where are we going? The bridge. She grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me mid-stride, forcing me to face her in the middle of the corridor, while alert klaxons wailed around us, and crew members ran past in both directions. The bridge is the first place they will target if this becomes hostile. You are supposed to be protecting me, not walking me into the most dangerous room on this ship. I'm not walking you into danger, Your Highness. I'm walking you toward the only room on this ship where anyone might be able to change what happens next. She stared at me, and I watched something shift behind her storm cloud eyes, some final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. You think they're here for you. I think it's possible. Cade, the Ashvane do not send an 11-ship warfleet across contested space for a single junior officer, no matter what reputation follows him. They don't, I agreed, which is exactly what worries me. We reached the bridge to find Captain Voss standing at the command console, his face carved from stone, watching the Ashvane fleet hold position at the edge of weapons range without firing, without hailing, without doing anything except sitting there in silent, patient formation, like a blade held an inch from the throat. Report, I said, before I could stop myself, and Voss glanced at me with an expression that suggested he had bigger problems than questioning why a lowly ensign was speaking out of turn on his bridge. They've made no demands, Voss said. No hail, no ultimatum, nothing. They're just sitting there. Sensors show full weapons charge across the entire formation, but no targeting locks. It's like they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Yseri asked. Before Voss could answer, the comm system chimed with an incoming transmission, and the bridge's main display flickered to life, showing a single figure standing alone against a dark background, tall and angular, with skin the color of burnished copper, and eyes that held no visible pupil at all, just smooth, reflective black. This is Overlord Crescent, of the Ashvane Dominion Fleet, the figure said, in a voice that carried no inflection, no emotion, nothing but flat, mechanical precision. I am addressing this transmission to Captain Halden Voss. This is Voss. State your intentions. My intentions are simple, Captain. I require confirmation of a single crew member's presence aboard your vessel. The bridge went very quiet. Which crew member? Voss asked carefully. Ensign Cade Rourke. Every head on the bridge turned toward me at once. I felt the weight of every eye in the room, Voss's sharp and calculating, the bridge crew's wide with sudden alarm, and Yseri's, beside me, fixed on my face with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I stepped forward before Voss could answer for me. I'm here. The Ashvane Overlord's smooth black eyes turned toward the camera, and for the first time since the transmission began, something in his posture shifted, some small, almost imperceptible change that on any other species might have been the beginning of a reaction. Confirm your identity, he said. Cade Rourke, Ensign, Concorde Diplomatic Escort Detail. You served in the response action at the Kestrel Reach Colony 4 years ago. It was not a question, and I did not treat it like one. I did. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears, and beside me, Yseri had gone completely still, her eyes locked on the display, her hands pressed flat against the console as if bracing for something. My brother commanded the Ashvane vessel that engaged the response force at Kestrel Reach, Overlord Crescent said finally. He did not return from that engagement. Neither did any officer under his command who came within firing range of the human position you held. The bridge crew stared at me now with something closer to fear than curiosity, and I felt the old, familiar weight settle back onto my shoulders, the weight I had spent 2 years trying to set down. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and I meant it, because whatever else had happened out there, I had never once taken satisfaction in it. But I won't apologize for what happened at Kestrel Reach. 11,000 people are alive today, because of what my unit did. I am not here for an apology, Ensign Rourke. Overlord Crescent's flat voice did not waver, did not rise, did not carry anything as simple as anger. I am here because Ashvane law requires formal acknowledgement of a debt of consequence. My brother's death, and the deaths of the officers under his command, were not the result of superior numbers, superior technology, or favorable circumstance. They were the result of a single human position that should not, by any reasonable measure, have been able to hold against the force sent to break it. "I don't understand," Voss said carefully. "Are you here to attack this vessel, Overlord, or not?" "I am here to observe." The answer landed strangely in the room, and I saw Voss's brow furrow with the same confusion I felt building in my own chest. Ashvane military doctrine requires that any officer responsible for a defeat of significant consequence be personally verified before further engagement is authorized against the individual or individuals responsible, Crescent continued. I have traveled 4 systems to confirm, in person, that Ensign Cade Rourke is precisely who our intelligence reported him to be, and not an exaggeration created by lesser species too frightened to face the truth plainly. His smooth black eyes studied me through the display, unblinking, patient, and for a long moment nobody on the bridge moved or spoke. "You are younger than the report suggested," Crescent said finally. "I was younger 4 years ago, Overlord." Kestrel Reach has become something of a legend among crews who did not witness it directly. Some claim a single human held that position alone against 50. Others claim there was no human position at all, that the colony's defenses did the work, and the story of a lone soldier was invented afterward to frighten rivals into caution. His flat voice carried no accusation, only the same mechanical precision it had held since the transmission began. "I find, now that I have seen you, that neither version is entirely accurate." "No, Overlord, it wasn't." "Then tell me the truth of it, Ensign, and I will decide for myself whether this vessel leaves this system unharmed." I felt Usari's hand find mine beside the console, quiet and steady, and I understood, in that moment, that whatever I said next would decide far more than just the fate of one diplomatic ship. I took a slow breath, and for the first time in 2 years, I began to tell the truth of Kestrel Reach out loud, to a room full of strangers, with a Dominion princess holding my hand, and an Ashvane war fleet waiting at the edge of weapons range for my answer. "There were 6 of us," I said, "not 50 against 1, not some invented legend, 6 human officers, holding a single defensive line at the edge of the colony's perimeter, because the evacuation routes weren't clear yet, and 11,000 civilians were still moving through them. Your brother's forces broke through our outer defenses in the first 20 minutes. We lost 2 of our 6 in that first exchange. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems. We didn't hold that line because we were stronger than the force sent against us," I continued. "We held it because the alternative was watching 11,000 people die behind us, and none of us were willing to let that happen while we still had breath left to stop it. It wasn't strategy, Overlord. It wasn't training beyond what any decent soldier receives. It was 4 people who refused to move, no matter what it cost them, until the evacuation was complete. And the cost? 2 more of us didn't survive the following hour. I was the only one still standing when the colony's defense grid finally came fully online and forced your brother's remaining forces to withdraw." Overlord Crescent's smooth black eyes held mine through the display for a long, silent moment, and I could not read anything in his flat, angular face. No anger, no grief, nothing I recognized as emotion at all. "You are telling me," he said finally, "that the defeat which has haunted Ashvane military doctrine for 4 years, the engagement that has made every commander in this fleet cautious of human positions ever since, was the result of 4 soldiers who simply refused to retreat." "Yes, Overlord." "That is a smaller truth than the legend suggests. It's the only truth I have." Something shifted in Crescent's posture then, subtle but unmistakable, and when he spoke again, his flat voice carried something that might, on a less controlled species, have been the beginning of respect. Ashvane doctrine values strength above nearly all things, Ensign Rourke, but there is an older doctrine beneath it, one my people rarely speak of openly, that values something else. The willingness to stand when standing costs everything, for the sake of those who cannot stand for themselves. He paused. My brother died against that willingness. It is not a weakness I am required to avenge. It is a strength I am required to acknowledge. He turned slightly, addressing something beyond the camera's view, and a moment later the tactical display on the Concorde's bridge updated, showing the 11 Ashvane vessels shifting formation, weapons charge dropping to standby, the entire fleet beginning a slow, deliberate withdrawal from the edge of the system. This vessel will not be engaged, Crescent said. Formal acknowledgement of the debt at Kestrel Reach is now recorded. You will not be pursued by Ashvane forces for this matter again, Ensign Rourke. The transmission ended before I could respond, the display going dark, leaving the entire bridge crew staring at the empty space where the most feared military commander in the sector had just stood down without firing a single shot. Beside me, Yseri's hand was still holding mine, her storm cloud eyes wide and fixed on my face, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. 4 soldiers, she said. Not 50. Not a legend. 4 people who refused to move. That's all it ever was. She looked at me for a long moment, something complicated and unreadable moving behind her eyes, and then, slowly, she let go of my hand and straightened her posture, pulling herself back together with the same discipline that had carried her through every negotiation I had watched her handle since we met. I owe you an apology, Ensign Rourke, she said, loud enough now for the whole bridge to hear. A significant one. You don't owe me anything, Your Highness. I judged you the moment I saw you, she said. I decided, based on nothing but your age and your rank, exactly how much you were worth. I was wrong, and I have rarely in my life been as thoroughly and completely wrong as I was about you. Around us, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the Ashvane fleet folded back into transit space and vanished, leaving behind nothing but confused sensor logs and a story that would, I suspected, spread through this sector even faster and wider than the one that had come before it. I did not yet know how much further it would spread, or how much it would change the way the entire galaxy looked at humanity in the months that followed. But standing there on that bridge, with a princess who had finally seen past the rank on my collar, I understood that whatever quiet, ordinary life I had been trying to build for myself was over, and something much larger was only just beginning. Word of the Ashvane withdrawal reached the Concorde Council before the fleet had even finished its transit jump, and by the time the Aurelian Concorde docked at the next station along its diplomatic route, I had gone from an anonymous ensign nobody bothered to remember, to a name whispered in security briefings across 3 sectors. I was not prepared for what came next, and I do not think anyone could have been. The first sign of it came from Captain Voss himself, who summoned me to his private quarters 2 days after the Ashvane fleet vanished, his usual steady composure replaced by something closer to careful curiosity. "Sit down, Ensign," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've spent the last 2 days reading everything the Concorde's records office is willing to release to me about Kestrel Reach, which, I should tell you, is almost nothing. It's still classified, sir." "I'm aware." He leaned back, studying me the way Yseri had studied me during our first conversation, searching for something beneath the surface. "What I do have is a request from 3 different diplomatic delegations, filed within the last 24 hours, all asking the same question. They want to know if the ensign assigned to Princess Volcatra's security detail is available for reassignment to their own missions. Sir, you've become valuable, Rourke, in a way that has nothing to do with your training record and everything to do with a reputation you clearly never wanted." He slid a data slate across the desk toward me. "The Reavers backed off a guaranteed fortune. The Ashvane, who have never once in recorded history withdrawn from a target they intended to take, folded an entire war fleet and left without firing a shot. Do you understand what that means to every predator species watching this sector?" "I have some idea, sir. It means humanity just became a great deal more interesting to a great many people, some of whom are allies and some of whom are not." He tapped the data slate. "The Concorde Council wants to know what to do with that. Frankly, so do I." I did not have a good answer for him, because I had spent 2 years trying very hard not to think about exactly this question, and having it asked directly by a ship's captain who deserved an honest response was harder than I expected. "I don't want to be a symbol, sir," I said finally. "I just want to do my job." Voss studied me for a long moment, and something in his expression softened, just slightly. "I don't think that's a choice you get to make anymore, Ensign. Not after this week." He was right. though it took me several more days to fully understand how right he was. The change happened slowly at first, then all at once. Crew members who had barely noticed me before began greeting me by name in the corridors. Delegates from species I had never directly interacted with found small, careful excuses to introduce themselves during official functions, watching my reactions with the kind of close attention usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. Even the Threll guards, who had once looked at me like I was something that had wandered in off the street, began nodding respectfully whenever I passed. Yseri watched all of it happen with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between amusement and something more thoughtful, and 3 days after the Ashvane withdrawal, she found me alone on an observation deck near the diplomatic wing, watching the slow turn of a nearby moon through the reinforced glass. "You look like a man being hunted," she said, stepping up beside me at the railing. "I feel like one." "By what?" "Every predator species in this sector has just learned, in the most public way possible, that hunting you is a very bad idea." "That's exactly the problem, Your Highness." I kept my eyes on the moon, watching its slow, patient rotation. For 2 years I was nobody. I could walk through a room and nobody remembered my face 5 minutes later. Now every delegate on this ship wants to shake my hand, every captain wants me on their crew, and somewhere out there, every ambitious young mercenary who wants to prove something is going to start looking for a way to test the legend instead of respecting it. Yseri was quiet for a moment, considering that. "You're afraid the story will outgrow the truth again, the way it did before." "I'm afraid it already has." She turned to face me fully, her storm cloud eyes steady and serious in a way that reminded me, once again, why her father trusted her with negotiations that could reshape entire trade routes. "Then let me offer you something, Cade, not as an apology, but as an alternative to disappearing into a legend you never wanted." "I'm listening." "My father's court has been searching for a permanent liaison to Concord Human Affairs for the better part of a year, someone who understands both human military culture and the political weight of Dominion protocol. Every candidate we've considered has been either too junior to be taken seriously, or too senior to be trusted with the delicacy the position requires." A faint smile touched her lips. "You, it turns out, are neither. You're offering me a job, Your Highness. I'm offering you control over your own story, Ensign Rourke. If you stay in the shadows, hoping the legend fades on its own, it will only grow larger with every year you spend refusing to shape it yourself. But if you step into a role where the truth of who you are matters more than the rumor, you have a chance to be remembered accurately, by the people who will actually decide how humanity is treated in this sector for the next century." I considered that for a long moment, watching the moon continue its slow, unbothered rotation outside the glass, indifferent to everything that had happened aboard this ship over the past week. "Why does this matter to you?" I asked finally. "You're a princess of one of the oldest ruling houses in the galaxy. You don't need to fight for a junior human officer's future." Her expression shifted, something more honest slipping through the careful diplomatic mask she usually wore. "Because a week ago, I looked at you and saw nothing worth my attention. I was wrong in a way that could have cost this entire vessel everything, if the story had gone differently than it did. I don't intend to make that mistake again, Cade, and I don't intend to let my house make it either." She paused. "Humanity is going to matter in this sector, whether the rest of the galaxy is ready for that or not. I would rather my house understand you accurately than fear you inaccurately." I thought about Kestrel Reach, about the 4 soldiers who had stood their ground because standing was the only thing that made sense in that moment, about the 2 who never made it home, about the 11,000 civilians who never knew any of our names and never needed to. I thought about 2 years of trying to disappear into ordinary duty, hoping the weight of that day would eventually stop following me. It never had. Maybe it never would. "I'll consider it," I said. "But I have one condition." "Name it." "Whatever role I take, it doesn't get built around a legend. If people are going to know my name, they're going to know the truth of what happened, not the version that grew in the spaces where nobody was paying attention. 4 soldiers, not 50. A defensive line, not a miracle. If the story can't survive being told honestly, I don't want any part of it." Yseri studied me for a long moment, and something in her expression settled into quiet respect. "That is precisely why I'm offering you the position, Ensign. Anyone can inflate a legend. It takes a rare kind of strength to insist on shrinking one back down to the truth." 3 weeks later, I stood in the Volcatra Dominion's formal court, wearing a new insignia that marked me as Concord Liaison to Human Affairs, watching Yseri address a gathering of delegates from a dozen different species with the same calm, practiced authority I had first seen from her aboard the Aurelian Concord. She told them about Kestrel Reach, but not the legend. The truth. 4 soldiers, a defensive line, a colony that survived because a handful of ordinary people refused to move when moving meant giving up on 11,000 lives they had never met. She told them about the Reavers who fled a fortune and the Ashvane fleet that folded without firing a shot, not because humanity possessed some overwhelming hidden power, but because a reputation built on genuine courage carried a weight that no amount of firepower could match. I watched the delegates listen, some skeptical, some quietly impressed, all of them recalculating, in real time, exactly how much attention humanity deserved going forward. After the gathering ended, a young Threll officer approached me near the exit, someone I had never met before, wearing the insignia of a border patrol unit stationed on the far edge of Dominion territory. "Liaison Rourke," he said, hesitant, clearly unsure how to address someone whose reputation had reached him before the man himself ever had. "I wanted to ask, is it true, what the princess said tonight?" "Every word of it," I said. He studied me for a moment, the same careful, searching look I had grown used to over the past 3 weeks, and then he did something I had not expected. He simply nodded, the tension easing out of his shoulders, and extended his hand the way humans did, a gesture he had clearly learned recently and specifically for this moment. "There's a human engineer stationed with my unit," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Ordinary posting, nothing special. At least that's what I always assumed. 2 days ago, a Karas scout ship passed near our border and changed course the moment they identified her on our crew roster. I didn't understand why until tonight." I felt something settle in my chest, quiet and unexpected, as I realized what he was telling me. "She's not connected to Kestrel Reach," I said. "I'd know if she was." "No," he agreed, "she isn't. As far as I can tell, she's simply human, and that alone was enough to make a Reaver captain reconsider his approach." He thanked me again, awkwardly, and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me standing near the exit with a feeling I had not expected to carry away from that evening, something that was not quite pride and not quite unease, but sat somewhere thoughtful in between. The legend of Kestrel Reach had never been about me alone, not really. It had grown, over 4 years, into something the whole galaxy attached to an entire species it barely understood yet, a quiet, uneasy respect built on the memory of ordinary people who had simply refused to move when it mattered most. I did not know, standing there, whether that respect would serve humanity well in the years ahead, or whether it would draw exactly the kind of dangerous attention I had spent 2 years trying to avoid. Probably both, in equal measure, the way most things worth having tend to arrive. But for the first time since Kestrel Reach, I did not feel like I was carrying that weight alone anymore. Somewhere out on the edge of Dominion territory, an ordinary engineer who had never fired a weapon in her life was walking through her days a little safer, protected by a reputation she had not asked for and had not earned herself, simply because she shared a species with 4 soldiers who once refused to move. Usari found me still standing near the exit as the gathering wound down, her formal robes replaced by something simpler, more comfortable. The sharp diplomatic mask softened into something closer to genuine warmth. "You look thoughtful," she said. "I was just thinking about how this started," I said. "A princess who thought I was just a rookie." "I remember." A faint smile crossed her face. "I was wrong about a great many things that week." "You weren't entirely wrong," I said. "I was a rookie, in most of the ways that mattered. Young, inexperienced, still learning most of my job. The only thing you got wrong was assuming that meant I couldn't matter." She considered that for a moment, then extended her hand toward me. Not the formal gesture of a Dominion princess addressing a subordinate, but something simpler, an offer between 2 people who had learned, over the course of 1 extraordinary week, to see past the ranks and titles that had first stood between them. "To whatever comes next, then," she said. "Rookie." I took her hand, and somewhere far beyond the walls of that quiet Dominion court, across a galaxy that was only just beginning to understand what humanity actually was, the story of 4 soldiers who refused to move, continued to travel from ship to ship, from crew to crew, growing a little larger and a little stranger with every telling, but never once losing the simple truth at its center. Some things were worth standing for, no matter the cost. And the galaxy, slowly and carefully, was starting to take notice.